It was supposed to be a simple wedding visit, but fate had other plans. Julia Bennett, a single mother of 5-year-old twins, was already running late as she hurried up the stone steps of St. Augustine's Cathedral. Her daughters, Lily and Emma, clung to each hand, complaining about their uncomfortable shoes. Julia reassured them there would be cake after the ceremony, just long enough to get through her old college friend Rachel's wedding. But as she stepped into the grand cathedral filled with chandeliers and silver ribbons, something felt off. She didn't recognize a single guest. Moments later, the realization hit her. Like a thunderclap, this wasn't Rachel's wedding. Trapped by politeness and timing, Julia stayed in the back pew with her daughters, hoping to quietly leave once the ceremony began. But when the groom turned around, time stood still. It was Matthew Carter, a billionaire tech mogul, and the man Julia had once loved. The man who never knew he had children. As Matthew's piercing blue eyes locked onto Julia's, and then the twins who shared his unmistakable features, everything unraveled. 5 years of silence, secrets, and sacrifice came rushing back. Julia hadn't meant to crash her former lover's wedding. But in doing so, she unknowingly crashed into the truth, and a moment that would change all their lives forever. 5 years of silence. 5 years of carefully built walls. And just one wrong wedding was all it took to bring it all crashing down. Julia Bennett hadn't planned to see Matthew Carter again, especially not like this. As she stood frozen in the last pew of St. Augustine's Cathedral, her twin daughters whispering loudly beside her, Julia felt the weight of every secret she had buried rise to the surface. The moment Matthew turned around and locked eyes with her, it was as if time stopped. She hadn't seen him since the day she left New York without a word. Back then, she had been his executive assistant, efficient, quiet, reliable. And somewhere between late-night meetings and shared coffees, something real had sparked. Their connection deepened beyond the confident, professional. But before it could become anything more, Julia discovered two things. She was pregnant, and he was about to be engaged. The engagement wasn't a surprise. Julia had processed the merger documents herself. Matthew's relationship with Veronica Langston, heiress to a global hotel empire, was no secret. It was strategic, powerful, inevitable. What was a surprise was the sharp ache in Julia's chest when she realized she was carrying his child. So she left no drama, no demands. She gave her resignation, changed cities, and vowed to raise her children with dignity and distance. She never asked for help. Never even sent a letter. To Julia, protecting her daughters meant removing herself from a world that wouldn't have welcomed them. And yet now, here they were, 5 years later, accidentally seated at Matthew Carter's wedding, and everything had unraveled. He had recognized her instantly. But more than that, he had seen the truth in the twins' faces. Their hazel eyes, shaped like his mother's. The soft curls. The same freckle he had on his own cheek as a child. Julia didn't have to say a word. The wedding halted. The bride, Veronica, seethed in fury. Guests whispered. Photographers turned. And Julia stood in the middle of it all, two small hands clinging to her trembling fingers. She had tried to leave quietly, but Matthew followed. Called her name. Demanded the truth. With a voice too gentle to be angry, and too familiar to ignore. When he asked if they were his children, Julia's silence was louder than words. Yes, she finally whispered. It was a confession wrapped in heartbreak. She had raised the girls alone, through sleepless nights, scraped knees, kindergarten performances, and birthdays with just the three of them. She had done it all without him, and not because he was unworthy, but because she thought he deserved better. Because she thought they didn't belong in the clean, ruthless world of .com-ash, billionaires and business mergers. But Matthew wasn't angry. He wasn't outraged, he was stunned. And in that moment, she saw something raw and real behind his carefully maintained exterior regret. As Veronica stormed away from the altar, publicly humiliated, her father already threatening to pull out of the business deal that had brought them together, Matthew didn't chase her. He chased Julia. In a private chapel office, as their daughters discovered a basket of picture books and began reading on the carpeted floor, Julia and Matthew had the first honest conversation they'd had in half a decade. He told her he'd searched for her hired investigators when she vanished. He'd assumed she wanted nothing to do with him. She explained her silence, not from spite, but from fear. She didn't want to ruin his future. She didn't want to be that woman who complicated everything. But now, things were already complicated. And even amidst the chaos, his company's stock plunging, the media frenzy brewing, outside, and Veronica painting herself as a victim on national television. Matthew wasn't thinking about mergers. He was thinking about them. Their daughters. Julia saw it in the way he knelt to speak to Zoe and Emma. The way he listened to their stories. The way he instinctively knew to let them lead the conversation. And when one of them crawled into his lap with a storybook and said, "You do the voices better than Mommy," Julia's heart cracked open. He had missed 5 years, but he wasn't going to miss another minute. "I want a chance," Matthew said, quietly. "Not just to be a father, but to know them. And maybe to know you again, too." Julia didn't answer right away. The emotions were too tangled: guilt, relief, fear, longing. She had spent years building a life without him. But deep down, she'd always wondered what might have been if she'd stayed. Now that question wasn't theoretical anymore. The chaos outside still loomed. Business decisions would need to be made. Legal teams would scramble. Reputations would be managed. But inside that quiet chapel office, for the first time in 5 years, there was no power struggle. No strategy. Just truth. And 3 lives waiting for a new beginning. The music stopped, but not because the ceremony had ended. It ended because everything changed the moment Matthew Carter, billionaire tech CEO, locked eyes with Julia Bennett and saw not just her, but them. 2 little girls with hazel eyes and soft curls, seated beside her in the back row of the cathedral. 2 girls who looked like him. The guests didn't know what was happening. The string quartet stumbled to a halt. The minister asked if they should proceed. But Matthew didn't move. His gaze was fixed on the pews in the back where the past had returned, in the most unexpected and undeniable form. His bride, Veronica Langston, turned to him in confusion. "Matthew?" she whispered, her voice sharp despite the smile frozen on her lips. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer. Because in that instant, he knew. Julia Bennett hadn't come to his wedding intentionally. She hadn't arrived to cause a scene or sabotage anything. In fact, she looked mortified. Embarrassed. Ready to disappear. But the girls with her twins, no older than 5, were a mirror of his own childhood. Photographs. Their faces, their eyes, the tiny freckle above the eyebrow one he'd inherited from his mother. It wasn't possible. And yet, there they were. Flesh and blood. His children. And suddenly, the polished wedding, the media frenzy, the business merger with the Langston hotel empire, it all blurred into the background. "Are they mine?" he asked Julia in a private whisper as he caught up with her near the blonde cathedral side doors. The answer didn't come with words. It came in the silence that followed. In the way her eyes filled with tears. In the way one of the girls tugged at her sleeve and asked, "Is that the man in wine? The picture Mommy keeps in her special box?" That box, the one filled with the few remnants of a life Julia had tried to forget. A magazine cover. A cufflink. A birthday bracelet. Memories of a love she'd buried. Matthew's fiancée was now behind him, her voice rising. "What is this? Who are they?" And when Julia finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Yes. They're yours." Veronica's face went pale. The guests began murmuring. The photographers shifted. Matthew's best man tried to intervene, but it was too late. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a reckoning. "I need to postpone the wedding," Matthew told the minister. Veronica's expression turned to ice. "Postpone?" "No," he said with sudden clarity. "Cancel." The fallout was instant. Veronica stormed out, her father yelling about breach of contract and public humiliation. Within an hour, headlines were everywhere. Billionaire groom walks out love child discovered at the altar. Julia tried to slip away quietly. She didn't belong in that world, not anymore. Not after 5 years of raising the girls alone, of scraping by with freelance gigs and sleepless nights. But Matthew wouldn't let her leave. He insisted on taking her and the twins through a private exit, away from the press. His mother, Eleanor Carter, unexpectedly stepped in. A woman of formidable grace and steel, Eleanor recognized the resemblance immediately. "They have your grandmother's eyes," she whispered, then turned to Julia with a smile that surprised them both. "Come with me, the penthouse will be a zoo. Let's go somewhere quieter." Julia reluctantly agreed, still in shock. Hours ago, she had been dressing her daughters for a nighters wedding. Now, she was standing in a stranger's estate, watching her children bond with the grandmother they'd never met and the father they'd only known from a photograph. It should have felt wrong. But somehow, it didn't. In a quiet moment on the terrace later that evening, Matthew found her watching the stars. "You didn't just disrupt a wedding today," she told him gently. "You changed everything." "I know," he said. "And I'd do it again." She turned to him, torn between gratitude and fear. "You gave up a billion-dollar merger." "I gave up a lie," he corrected. "Veronica and I were building a dynasty. But not a life. Not a family." Julia exhaled slowly, letting the truth settle. She had never expected this, never hoped for reunion, let alone redemption. But Matthew's sincerity was hard to ignore. "I want to know them," he continued. "The way you do. I want to be there for the bedtime stories, the fevers, the school plays. And I want to know you again, if you'll let me." Julia looked at him, unsure. "You're not afraid of what the world will say? About your image? Your empire?" He smiled. "I'm more afraid of losing another 5 years." And in that moment, Julia saw it. Not the CEO, not the public figure, but the man she had once fallen in love with. A man stripped of pride and ambition, standing in the ruins of what it could have been, and asking for a second chance. They weren't a couple anymore. Not yet. But they were a family, one forged by accident, distance, and now choice. And for the first time in years, Julia let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this time it wouldn't fall apart. Julia Bennett had never intended to return to Matthew Carter's life, not like this, not through chaos, scandal, and heartbreak. But now that the truth was out, there was no undoing it. She sat quietly in the plush chapel office, her twin daughters, Lily and Emma, nestled beside her on a velvet sofa. They were flipping through children's books, blissfully unaware of the media storm raging just outside the cathedral walls. Matthew had canceled the wedding. Veronica Langston had walked away in a fury. And the Langston family, powerful and vengeful, was threatening lawsuits, public humiliation, and financial retaliation. And yet, Matthew stayed. He had postponed board meetings, ignored investor panic, and even told his legal team to draft a restraining order against Veronica and her PR army. In the midst of a professional crisis that would have rattled any CEO, Matthew Carter had one priority: them, their daughters. And Julia. "I know it's overwhelming," Matthew said gently, sitting across from her now, elbows on his knees, eyes steady. "But I need you to know, this isn't about damage control. I don't want to just claim responsibility on paper or pay support to tick some moral box." Julia swallowed hard. "Then what is it about?" "It's about being a father." "About being their father," he replied, glancing toward the girls. "And being a part of the life I walked away from without realizing it." She wanted to believe him. But her heart still carried years of silence, of watching him rise to international fame while she juggled diapers and deadlines alone. "Matthew," she said, voice low, "your company is crumbling. Your name is on every headline. You just canceled a wedding watched by half the tech world. And you're here, in a church office, talking to your ex-secretary." He gave a soft laugh. "You're more than that, and you always were." Julia looked away, unsure how to respond. She'd spent 5 years convincing herself that what they had was temporary, fleeting. That she'd made the right decision by leaving before the merger, before the tabloids, before love could turn into regret. "Do you know how many nights I stared at your photo, wondering if you even remembered me?" she whispered. "I had no one. No nanny. No trust fund. No family support. Just 2 babies who depended on me for everything." "I wish I could go back," Matthew said, his voice thick with remorse. "I wish I could change the way things happened. But I can't. All I can do is be here now, and stay." Before Julia could respond, the door opened and Eleanor Carter stepped inside, graceful as ever, a storm of elegance and steel wrapped in a tailored navy suit. She looked at Julia first, then at the twins, and finally her son. "I assume we're not going back to the penthouse?" she asked. "No," Matthew replied. "Too many cameras. I was hoping we could use the Connecticut estate for a few days. It's quiet. Private." Eleanor nodded. "I've already arranged it. The car is waiting below. I've had essentials delivered: clothes, food, even new shoes for the girls." She looked at Julia. "You and I haven't properly met, but I'm not here to judge your choices. I'm here because I've missed 5 years of my granddaughters' lives, and I don't intend to miss another. Julia blinked, caught off guard by the woman's calm decisiveness. Just for the weekend, she said cautiously. The girls have school on Monday. Understood, Eleanor said with a warm smile. Let's get through tonight. They exited through the cathedral's private tunnels, bypassing the press entirely. The Connecticut estate was sprawling but quiet, nestled among trees painted gold and crimson by autumn. But what surprised Julia wasn't its size, it was its warmth. Family photos lined the walls. A fireplace crackled softly. And in the den, Eleanor had already set out blankets, bedtime books, and even a tray of milk and cookies. Later that night, after the girls had fallen asleep in a guest room full of borrowed stuffed animals, Julia found herself standing alone on the terrace. The sky above was dusted with stars. The air carried the scent of pine and the whisper of distant wind. She didn't hear Matthew approach, but she felt it. He stepped beside her, hands tucked in his pockets, quiet for a long moment. I used to dream about this, he finally said. Not the headlines. Not the chaos. But the family. Julia turned to him. You built an empire. Why would you dream of something so ordinary? Because empires are empty without someone to come home to, he said softly. Because none of it matters if I don't know my own daughter's favorite color, or what song puts them to sleep, or what stories they ask for at bedtime. And what about me? Julia asked, heart pounding. Where do I fit in your dream? Matthew looked at her, eyes full of something deeper than nostalgia. You're the beginning of it. And maybe, if you let me, the middle and end, too. She looked away, unsure of what to say. I'm scared, Matthew. Not of you, but of what this means. Of giving my heart again. Of raising our girls in a spotlight I never asked for. He nodded. Then let's take it one step at a time. No pressure. No expectations. Just two parents trying to do right by their kids. The simplicity of it made her smile. Start with breakfast, she said, voice soft. You'll learn they like blueberry pancakes. But only if the blueberries are shaped like hearts. He grinned. Noted. The conversation drifted to laughter, to old memories, to quiet silences that didn't need filling. And as the night deepened, Julia realized something she hadn't dared to believe since the moment she left New York 5 years ago. Maybe this wasn't the end of her story with Matthew. Maybe it was only the beginning. The Connecticut estate was quieter than Julia Bennett had expected, not in the way grand houses are quiet, cold and echoing, but in the way a home is quiet when it's finally at peace. Lily and Emma were asleep upstairs, tucked into a guest room, hastily transformed by Eleanor Carter herself, Matthew's mother. The room, filled with storybooks, nightlights, and freshly delivered pajamas, looked like it had been waiting for them all along. Julia stood on the terrace, wrapped in a wool sweater, watching the night deepen into stillness. Matthew stepped out beside her, the weight of the day hanging on his shoulders, yet his face softened by something new, something gentle. They're really asleep? He asked. Julia nodded. Eventually, Lily insisted on 3 stories. Emma negotiated for one more. Cookie. He smiled. They're brilliant negotiators. They get it from their father, she said before she could stop herself. Silence settled between them, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of things. Unspoken. Things they both knew were true but hadn't had the courage to say. I meant what I said earlier. Matthew finally broke the silence. This isn't about obligation. It's about love. I missed 5 years, Julia. I don't want to miss another minute. Julia looked down at her hands. It's not just about showing up now, it's about staying. About being there when they're sick, when they fight over who gets the last pancake, when one of them comes home crying from school, because someone called her weird for having a dad on magazine covers and a mom who works 2 jobs. He turned to her. Then let me stay. She exhaled slowly. I want to believe you. But I've been doing this on my own for so long, I don't know how to share it. Matthew nodded. Then we figure it out together. Slowly. As partners. As co-parents. As. He stopped himself, unsure whether to finish the sentence. Julia's voice was soft. As maybe something more. He looked at her, eyes filled with quiet hope. Only if you want it to be. Before she could respond, they were interrupted by a voice behind them. I told the girls we'd look for cookies tomorrow. Eleanor stepped out, holding 2 glasses of wine. One for the mother who raised them with more grace than most could manage, she said, handing Julia a glass, and one for my son, who's finally learning what truly matters. Julia accepted the glass with a grateful nod. Thank you, Eleanor. For everything. Eleanor gave a smile. No need for thanks. I've been waiting years to be a grandmother. I don't intend to waste another second. She turned to Matthew. And you, she said, arching an eyebrow, will face the board. Tomorrow. But tonight, you are just a father, and maybe, if you don't mess it up, something more than that. Matthew gave a sheepish smile. Understood. Eleanor walked back inside, leaving them alone again under the stars. She's a force of nature, Julia said with a chuckle. She's also right, Matthew replied. I have to face the fallout. The board is furious. Veronica's family is threatening to sue. Hayes Technologies dropped 12% this afternoon. Julia winced. I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. He shook his head. Julia, stop apologizing. I made choices. I knew what I was risking the moment I saw the girls and knew the truth. I could have gone through with the wedding, but I didn't. Because I finally saw what mattered. You didn't even hesitate, she whispered. He turned to her. Because I knew what I was looking at. My family. Julia's breath caught. Not from fear. But from the way the word family landed. It wasn't just about Lily and Emma anymore. It was about them, the woman who had once loved him, the woman he'd tried to forget and failed. I don't know what happens next, she admitted. There's no roadmap for this. We don't need one, he said. We just take it one day at a time. The next morning, Lily and Emma were up before dawn, bouncing into the kitchen in borrowed slippers. Eleanor had already arranged for a chef, who quickly learned the girls' preferred breakfast was smiley face pancakes with syrup and exactly 3 blueberries per plate. Matthew read to them in the sunroom, while Julia watched from the doorway, arms crossed, a smile tugging at her lips. He wasn't perfect. He didn't know all the words to their favorite songs. He didn't cut the toast into the right triangles. But he tried. And he laughed when he messed up. He let them braid his hair with rubber bands and plastic clips. And when Emma fell and scraped her knee on the patio, he was the first one there with a band-aid and a hug that made her stop crying. It wasn't about grand gestures. It was the small things. That night, before leaving for Boston, Julia stood with the girls at the front door. Are we coming back here? Lily asked, eyes wide with hope. Julia hesitated. Would you like to? Both girls nodded eagerly. Matthew knelt in front of them. You'll always have a place here. And so will your mom. He looked up at Julia, not pressuring, not pleading, just offering. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone in the world she had built from survival. She felt safe. Okay, she said quietly. Let's see where this goes. And just like that, they weren't broken pieces anymore. They were something new. A family, not formed by perfection, but by choice. By love that had once been lost. And was now slowly, patiently, coming home. The first time Julia Bennett held her newborn daughters, she made a silent promise to protect them, no matter the cost. Even if that meant raising them alone. Even if it meant walking away from the only man she had ever loved. And now, 5 years later, standing at the edge of Matthew Carter's Connecticut estate, watching her daughters chase each other through fallen leaves while their father, their real father, laughed along with them, that promise felt both fulfilled and transformed. Because she hadn't protected them from him. She had protected them from a version of him. She thought she knew, a man consumed by ambition, driven by power, entangled in a codependent, loveless engagement. But the man she saw now. This wasn't a titan of industry or a polished media darling. This was a father trying to make up for lost time. And he was doing it, not through grand apologies or expensive gifts, but by showing up. By sitting on the carpet and letting Lily braid ribbons into his hair. By reading Emma's favorite book with silly voices until she collapsed in a fit of giggles. By listening. By learning. By loving, in the quiet, consistent way Julia never imagined he could. That evening, after dinner, Julia found herself walking beside Matthew in the garden. The air was cool, stars peeking through clouds above. The girls were inside, safe and warm with Eleanor, who had somehow become both a commanding presence and an unexpectedly tender grandmother. You've changed, Julia said softly. Matthew glanced at her. You mean I've softened? I mean you've grown. You used to be untouchable. I used to think that was strength, he admitted. Now I realize it was fear. I pushed people away before they could leave. Controlled everything so I didn't have to feel anything. She stopped walking. And now? He turned to face her. Now I feel everything, all at once. Julia smiled faintly. That sounds exhausting. It is. But it's worth it. He took a breath. You asked me once, when we were younger, what I wanted most in life. I told you power. Success. Legacy. I remember, she said. I lied, he admitted. What I wanted, what I still want, is realness. Something that isn't performative. Something that doesn't care about market shares or social media or magazine spreads. Something that looks like a 5-year-old insisting I wear glittery butterfly clips to a board meeting. Julia laughed softly. You didn't. I will. If it gets me another hour with them. A beat passed. I don't want to be a visitor in their lives, Julia, he continued. I want to be present. I want to learn their quirks, their fears, their dreams. I want to know what makes Lily cry and what makes Emma laugh until she snorts. They both hate thunderstorms, Julia said quietly. Lily hides under a blanket. Emma pretends she's not scared, but she always sleeps beside her sister after. I'll remember that. And Lily refuses to eat the crust on sandwiches. Good, more for me. Julia looked at him, truly looked at him, not as the man she had fled, but as the man who had chosen to stay. You're not the same person I left. No, he said. But I've never stopped being the man who loved you. She blinked. You don't have to say anything, he added quickly. This isn't about picking up where we left off. Too much has changed. Too much has happened. I just want you to know. You were never a mistake, Julia. You were the best part of my life. For a long moment, all she could do was breathe. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you, she said at last. I left because I did love you. And I thought letting you go was the only way to protect what we had. But I didn't protect anything. I just created 5 years of ache. He stepped closer. So what do we do now? She looked toward the house, where their daughter's laughter drifted faintly through the windows. We try, she whispered. Not for the past. For the future, Matthew nodded. No expectations. No timelines. Just effort. And honesty. And boundaries, she added with a smile. Deal. They shook on it, fingers lingering just a moment too long. And that night, as the twins begged for just one more story, and Matthew obliged with animated voices and dramatic flourishes, Julia leaned in the doorway and watched the scene. She never thought she'd see her daughters, curled against their father, cheeks flushed with joy. No tension. No fear. Just belonging. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever would be. But it was real. And maybe that was more powerful than perfection. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the rekindling of a broken flame. Maybe it was the lighting of a brand new one, steadier, stronger, and finally safe enough to burn. 6 months later, Julia Bennett stood beneath the archway of a much smaller cathedral this time in a white dress she had designed herself. No paparazzi. No luxury press. Just clothes. Friends, trusted colleagues, and the 2 little girls now twirling at the altar in lavender dresses. Lily and Emma. This was not the wedding she had imagined 5 years ago, because she had stopped imagining weddings altogether. After heartbreak, silence, and struggle, she'd built her life around motherhood, not romance. But standing beside Matthew Carter now, hand in hand, she understood something profound. The wrong path had led her exactly where she was meant to be. Matthew wasn't the man she left. He was the man who had fought to come back, not with promises, but with presence. And Julia had learned to trust again, not because he convinced her, but because he stayed. Through public scandal, corporate collapse, and emotional uncertainty, he stayed. For her. For their daughters. For their future. As they stepped forward together as a family, they weren't just celebrating love. They were honoring second chances, resilience, and the beautiful, messy work of becoming whole again together. Sometimes, life doesn't give us the story we planned. It gives us the one we need. True love isn't always about perfection, it's about persistence, presence, and the courage to begin for again. Let this be a reminder. You are never too far gone for a second chance, especially in love, especially in family. What part of this story moved you the most? Tell us in the comments, we'd love to hear your voice. Don't forget to like if this story touched your heart, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful, emotional journeys. Turn on notifications so you never miss another story of love, justice, and redemption.